Hey viewers! Hope you're all doing great. Before I start the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. So let's begin. Close your eyes for just a moment, and imagine Europe not as you know it today. Not the clean borders drawn on modern maps, but a trembling patchwork of forgotten flags, lost crowns, and vanished ideals. These are Europe's ghost republics. The nations that once breathed, fought, and dreamed, and then quietly faded away. Before the lights of modern Europe flickered into being, the continent was alive with small republics. Tiny experiments in liberty, kingdoms of the mind, communes of trade, and empires that dissolved like mist. Each of them carried a heartbeat. And though the maps changed, the stories stayed, whispering beneath the soil. Let's go back centuries ago. When the Holy Roman Empire stretched across Central Europe, power wasn't fixed. It was fluid, flowing between city-states, dukedoms, bishoprics, and free republics. One day a city might be a thriving power, with its own army and senate. The next, swallowed whole by a neighbor or crushed by empires expanding like waves. Take, for instance, the Republic of Ragusa. Nestled along the Dalmatian coast, it shimmered like a pearl by the Adriatic. Ragusa, what we know today as Dubrovnik, was once a powerful maritime republic, rivaling Venice herself. Founded in the 7th century, Ragusa rose from refugees escaping Slavic invasions of the Roman city of Epidaurus. In time, they built walls of white limestone that gleamed beneath the Mediterranean sun, and ships that sailed all the way to the Levant. For centuries, Ragusa thrived on trade and diplomacy. It survived by balancing loyalties, paying tribute to the Ottoman Empire while maintaining friendly relations with Christian Europe. The city's motto was inscribed with quiet pride: Non bene pro toto libertas venditur oro. Liberty is not well sold for all the gold. Yet even liberty can fade. In 1808, Napoleon's troops marched in, ending over 400 years of proud independence. Ragusa became part of the French Illyrian provinces, then fell under Austrian rule, and the republic, like a candle in the wind, was gone. If you listen to the Adriatic waves at night, they still whisper that name, Ragusa. Now drift a little north, to the Alpine valleys and Emerald Plains, where the Republic of Venice once commanded the world's most powerful fleet. Venice was more than a city. It was a floating empire, a miracle of human will, rising from mud and marshes into marble palaces and trade routes that stretched to Asia. Founded in the 5th century, Venice became the queen of the Adriatic, governed by its doge and senate, defended by sailors whose oars beat like drums across the sea. Venice's wealth was legend. Its merchants brought silk from China, spices from India, and stories from lands no one else had seen. For 1,000 years Venice was free, independent from kings, emperors, or popes. But freedom often breeds envy. In 1797, Napoleon Bonaparte, that restless wind of revolution, reached the gates of Venice. The Doge, Ludovico Manin, watched helplessly as the city surrendered. The French stripped Venice of her treasures. The Austrians divided her spoils. And just like that, after more than a millennium, the Republic of Venice was no more. The canals remain. The bells still ring. But the Republic is a ghost. Its soul scattered across stone bridges and watery alleys. Take a slow breath. Let the sound of history settle around you. We're still only at the beginning. Because for every Venice, there was a Genoa, a Lucca, a San Marino that survived by inches. Genoa, fierce, proud, and ever at war with Venice, carved her dominion across the Mediterranean, even ruling Corsica. But revolts, invasions, and internal feuds drained her strength. By 1797, Napoleon again arrived, reshaping her into the short-lived Ligurian Republic. It lasted just 7 years before being annexed by France, and then later handed to Sardinia. Genoa's Red Cross flag faded into memory, though her descendants still walk her narrow alleys whispering, "We were once a republic." And what about the Republic of Cospaia? Ah, now that one is strange. Small enough to fit in a whisper. Born by accident in 1440, when a border treaty between the Papal States and Florence forgot to include a tiny strip of land. The locals declared independence, and for nearly 400 years, they stayed free, with no army, no ruler, and no taxes. Their main trade: tobacco, grown, rolled, and sold under the banner of a forgotten mistake. Cospaia's motto was simple: Perpetua et firma libertas, eternal and firm liberty. But eternity, it seems, is never guaranteed. In 1826, this tiny microstate finally agreed to join Tuscany and the Papal States. The last free farmers of Cospaia lowered their flag and walked quietly into history. Still, imagine that. A nation born from a line on a map, and lasting longer than many empires. Now picture the continent shifting like an old parchment, kingdoms vanishing, republics blinking out. The medieval and early modern centuries were a theater of survival. Between the 12th and 19th centuries, Europe saw over 100 such republics, from merchant leagues to pirate enclaves, all lost now, buried beneath modern states. The Duchy of Kurland, in today's Latvia, once built colonies in Africa and the Caribbean. The Republic of Siena defied Florence until crushed in 1555. The Republic of Novgorod, in faraway Russia, stood as a beacon of democracy before being absorbed by Ivan the Terrible's empire in 1478. Each one is a ghost, an echo of what Europe once dared to be. So as we move through this story, through the cobbled streets of old capitals, through wars, treaties, and revolutions, I want you to listen closely, to imagine the sound of bells tolling across vanished squares, the flicker of candlelight on faces that no longer exist, the hush before a nation disappears. This is the history not of kings, but of dreams that once ruled the map. Dreams that believed freedom could last forever. And now we begin to follow them, one by one. Let us wander eastward now, into the shadowed plains of Eastern Europe. The land here once belonged to princes and republics alike, caught between empires that never stopped expanding. The story of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth begins with glory and ends with silence. Once the largest and most powerful state in Europe, it stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea, a union of two proud nations joined by the Union of Lublin in 1569. For 2 centuries, it stood as a beacon of tolerance and democracy in an age of absolute kings. The nobles elected their king through free vote, a rare sight in Europe's monarchy-cluttered map. But democracy, when stretched too thin, can be fragile. The Commonwealth became paralyzed by the liberum veto, the right of any single noble to block the decisions of Parliament. And as foreign powers, Russia, Prussia, Austria, grew stronger, they began to slice into the Commonwealth's territory like wolves circling a wounded deer. In 1795 it was gone, erased completely, divided among its neighbors. For over 100 years, Poland and Lithuania ceased to exist on maps, but not in hearts. Poets, musicians, soldiers kept whispering, Česká Polska nie zginęła. Poland is not yet lost. And in those whispers, the ghost republic lived on. Now, to the north, across the cold rivers and misty pine forests, we find another lost realm, the Republic of Novgorod. Before Moscow rose to power, Novgorod was a free merchant republic, a member of the Hanseatic League, trading furs and wax with Germany, England, and Scandinavia. Its people elected a posadnik, a kind of mayor, and gathered in open assemblies known as vesh, where citizens rang a great bell to summon meetings. The chronicles tell of the sound of that bell echoing across frozen lakes, a sound of freedom. But freedom was fragile in the shadow of growing Muscovy. Ivan III, Grand Prince of Moscow, sought to unite the Russian lands under his rule. In 1478, his armies entered Novgorod, carrying away the great bell as a trophy. The city was stripped of its rights, and its republic, one of the oldest in Europe, disappeared. The silence that followed was deep, as if the snow itself mourned. Now drift down to the heart of the continent, to the free city of Danzig, today's Gdansk in Poland. Two once lived between worlds. In 1807, Napoleon declared Danzig a free city, a semi-independent state meant to serve his military campaigns. For a few brief years, Danzig had its own constitution, army, and ruler. But after Napoleon's fall, it was handed to Prussia, and its freedom was gone. The city regained brief independence again in 1920 under the League of Nations, but that second chance was even shorter. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland through Danzig, and the city's status as a free city ended in fire and ruin. Still, the idea of Danzig as a crossroads, free, international, alive, remains a ghostly dream in the Baltic fog. Let's step further south now. Do you hear the sound of water wheels turning in the valleys of the Alps? That's the memory of the Republic of Mulhouse, once part of the old Swiss Confederacy. For centuries, Mulhouse remained fiercely independent, a Protestant city surrounded by Catholic territories, choosing its own laws, minting its own coins. But in 1798, the French Revolution swept through Alsace. Mulhouse, pressured and surrounded, voted to join France. Freedom gave way to survival. Today it's just another city, but the old city hall still carries its coat of arms, a silent reminder of when it was a republic all by itself. Let's move closer to the Mediterranean once more. The sun brightens, and the air smells of salt. Here the Republic of Lucca once stood, tiny, proud, and determined. Born in the Middle Ages, it survived against all odds, surrounded by the ambitions of Florence and Pisa. Lucca's people built strong walls, not just of stone but of independence. Even when Napoleon came, he couldn't resist reshaping it. He gave it as a gift to his sister Elisa Bonaparte in 1805. The Republic was gone, replaced by a principality. After Napoleon's fall, it returned briefly as a duchy, then was finally absorbed into unified Italy in 1847. Still, if you walk Lucca's ramparts today, you can feel the heartbeat of its ghost beneath your feet, steady and proud. Now, follow me east again, to the mountains between Austria and Italy, where once lived the Republic of Carnia. In 1944, in the middle of World War II, Italian partisans declared an independent republic in the valleys of Friuli. It lasted only a few months before German troops returned. But even in that brief time, farmers, teachers, and workers ran their own councils, held elections, printed newspapers. Proof that even in darkness, the idea of freedom burns bright. The Republic of Carnia faded quickly, but its flame still glows in the memory of those who believe in self-rule. Europe's map, if seen from above, looks calm, but beneath it are layers upon layers of vanished frontiers. Small states swallowed by empires, republics erased by treaties, cities lost to revolutions. The soil itself is heavy with memory, and when rain falls on the stones of Dubrovnik, or the canals of Venice, or the walls of Lucca, it's as if the continent weeps for all the republics it has lost. These were not the only ones, of course. Ahead lies a darker age, when revolutions swept across Europe, from the Napoleonic Wars to the spring of 1848. That's where we'll travel next, through the ghost republics that flickered briefly in the light of revolution, and vanished into the silence of empire. Europe was trembling now. The 19th century had arrived, and with it, revolution after revolution. It was a century of hope, of rebellion, of fleeting republics that lived only for a heartbeat, before they vanished again. Close your eyes and picture it. Spring 1848. Across the continent, bells are ringing, flags are rising, and crowds fill the streets. From Paris to Vienna, from Milan to Budapest, the people are demanding freedom. They call it the springtime of nations. And among them were born some of the most haunting ghost republics of all. Let's begin in Rome, once the heart of an empire, and briefly, once more, a republic. In February 1849, after centuries of papal rule, the people of Rome declared the Roman Republic. Its leaders were men of vision: Giuseppe Mazzini, Carlo Armellini, and Aurelio Saffi, guided by the dream of uniting Italy under liberty and law. For a few glorious months, Rome became a beacon. The tricolor flag flew from the ancient ruins, and the people gathered beneath it, whispering that history had turned full circle, that the empire of Caesars had given birth to a republic of citizens. But fate was unkind. The Pope called for help, and French troops came to restore order. After a fierce siege, The Roman Republic fell in July 1849. Its leaders fled, its defenders were killed, and the Papal States returned. Still, the dream they lit would not die. It would take another 2 decades before Italy would finally rise as one nation. Yet for that brief moment, Rome remembered what freedom tasted like. Now let's move northeast to the rolling plains of Hungary. The Hungarian Revolution of 1848 was another bright spark. Led by Lajos Kossuth, a man whose speeches could stir the dead, Hungary declared its independence from the Austrian Empire. For a time, the world watched in awe as Hungarian soldiers, farmers, students, poets, fought the imperial armies. They even formed a provisional government, minted their own currency, and wrote their own laws. But by 1849, the dream was crushed beneath Russian and Austrian boots. Kossuth fled into exile, and Hungary was chained again. Yet even in defeat, Hungary's revolution left a mark. It taught the world that empires are not eternal. They too are mortal. Now drift westward toward the Alps once again, to the city of Venice, reborn for a brief shining moment. Yes, Venice, the queen of the Adriatic, rose once more from her watery grave. After the fall of Napoleon, Venice had been under Austrian rule. But in 1848, inspired by revolutions elsewhere, the people rebelled. Under the leadership of Daniele Manin, they declared the Republic of San Marco. The Lion of St. Mark, long banished from flags, returned. The bells rang from St. Mark's Basilica. The people sang in the streets, and once again Venice stood free. But Austria would not let her go. For more than a year, the city endured siege and starvation. When it finally surrendered in August 1849, its citizens were too weak to resist. The Republic of San Marco faded, but her spirit, like the sea mist, never left the lagoon. Let's walk north now to Germany, a land not yet unified but restless. In the wake of 1848, small republics bloomed and died like wildflowers in the storm. In Baden, in Saxony, in the Rhineland, people raised revolutionary flags. The Frankfurt Parliament tried to write a constitution for a free Germany, but the kings and princes still held the guns. When the smoke cleared, the dream of a German republic lay in ruins, waiting for another century to come. And yet, these ghost republics, Roman, Venetian, Hungarian, German, they were not failures. They were echoes ahead of their time. They planted the ideas that would later shape modern Europe. Liberty, unity, the rule of the people. They whispered that even when crushed, freedom finds its way back. Now slowly let us cross over to France. Because no land gave birth to more republics, and watched more of them die than France herself. After Napoleon's fall, the monarchy returned, first as Bourbon, then as Orleans. But the people of France never forgot their revolution. In 1848 they rose again, crying out for liberty, equality, fraternity. The Second French Republic was born. For 4 years, France lived under a new constitution. The poor could vote, slavery was abolished in the colonies, and freedom of the press returned. But the man elected as president, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, would soon betray the dream. In 1852 he seized power, crowned himself emperor, and created the Second Empire. The Republic was gone again, swallowed by ambition. Still, France would not stop. She would have her Third Republic in 1870, her fourth in 1946, her fifth in 1958. Each one born from ashes, each one haunted by the ghosts of those before. As we move through this century of change, you can almost see the pattern. Small nations rise, carried by ideals, then fall, crushed by empires or betrayed by their own leaders. But none of them vanish completely. They linger, like faint lights under the surface of Europe's history, glowing softly whenever freedom returns to the world. Imagine now the map again, glowing in candlelight, the borders shifting like water, the names fading in and out. Ragusa, Venice, Genoa, Lucca, Rome, San Marco, Novgorod, Ansig, each one a voice murmuring in the dark. And if you listen long enough, they begin to blend. A single low hum of forgotten nations. They are Europe's conscience, whispering that no state, no empire lasts forever. Only the idea of freedom endures. But the story doesn't stop here. Ahead lies a colder age, the 20th century, where republics would fall not to emperors but to ideologies, where lines on the map would be redrawn in blood, and new ghost republics would rise from war's rubble. We will walk into that darkness, carefully, for the ghosts there still remember. The century turns, the air grows colder, and Europe stands trembling at the edge of war. Old empires, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, loom like shadows ready to fall. And within those empires, the smallest nations still dream, quietly, of their own republics. It is 1914. The first shots are fired in Sarajevo, and soon the entire continent burns. When the Great War ends in 1918, the old order collapses like a tower of sand. From its ruins, dozens of new states emerge, some to last and others to fade like smoke. They called it the Age of Self-Determination. But for many, it was only another chapter of loss. One of the strangest ghosts born in that moment was the Republic of German Austria. When the Habsburg Empire fell, the German-speaking provinces of Austria declared themselves a new republic, free, independent, and hopeful. Their wish was to unite with Germany, believing they were one people now freed from the emperor's rule. But the Allied powers forbade it. The Treaty of Saint-Germain in 1919 carved out a small, landlocked nation, and forbade even the use of the name German Austria. Instead, they were to be simply Austria, a small country with a great past, and a haunting future. Across the mountains, in the ashes of Hungary, another ghost republic appeared. The Hungarian Soviet Republic. In 1919, amid the chaos after World War I, a radical government led by Béla Kun seized power. For 133 days, Hungary lived as a communist republic, nationalizing land and industry, promising equality, and fighting off invading armies. But the dream burned too bright. By August, the regime collapsed under Romanian invasion and internal revolt. Kun fled, and the red banners were torn down. In their place came Admiral Horthy's conservative regime, a monarchy without a king. The ghost of the Hungarian Soviet Republic lingered, silent, and half forbidden to speak of for decades. Now drift westward again, into Germany, a country caught between victory and ruin. After the Kaiser's fall in 1918, Germany became the Weimar Republic, fragile, democratic, and restless. Born out of revolution, it promised freedom, culture, and reform. Artists filled Berlin's cafés with jazz and modernism. Thinkers spoke of progress and peace. But underneath, the wounds of war and humiliation festered. Inflation devoured savings, extremist movements grew, and the republic began to die long before it was killed. In 1933, Adolf Hitler took power, and the Weimar Republic vanished, replaced by a nightmare. It had lasted just 14 years, but its ghost still drifts through German history. A warning, a sigh, a memory of what could have been. Now let's move to the far north, to the cold shores of Finland. Here too there was a moment, short, bitter, forgotten, called the Finnish Socialist Workers' Republic. In 1918, during the Finnish Civil War, the Red Guards declared their own state, separate from the White forces loyal to the Senate. For 4 months they tried to build a new order, one of equality and workers' rights. But the Whites, backed by German troops, crushed them. Tens of thousands died. And when the war ended, Finland was independent, but scarred forever. The ghost of the Red Republic remained unspoken, buried in silence and shame for generations. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the sound of the old world breaking, glass shattering, maps being redrawn, flags being lowered. In 1918, Europe became a graveyard of monarchies. Yet every grave birthed a new experiment. Brief, fragile, human. Consider the Republic of Perloja, a small village in Lithuania that declared independence after World War I. Without a government above them, the villagers simply took control. They elected a president, printed their own currency, and ran their affairs for nearly 5 years before being absorbed into Lithuania. A micro-republic born from chaos. No army, no ambitions. Just ordinary people trying to keep order when the rest of the world collapsed. Or think of the free territory of Fiume on the Adriatic coast, now Rijeka in Croatia. After the war, Fiume became a city of confusion, claimed by Italy, by Yugoslavia, by no one. In 1919, the poet-soldier Gabriele D'Annunzio marched in with his followers, declaring a new republic. He filled the city with speeches, songs, and ceremonies, a strange blend of art, anarchy, and nationalism. They called it La Reggenza Italiana del Carnero. It lasted 15 months. When the Italian army finally forced D'Annunzio out, he fired a cannon at the city as he left. The republic was gone, but the performance of it lingered, like a dream too theatrical to believe. Further east, across the Black Sea winds, came the Ukrainian People's Republic, born in the chaos of 1917. For a brief and chaotic time, Ukraine tried to stand alone between Red Russia and White Russia, between Germany and Poland. Governments rose and fell within months. Central Rada, Hetmanate, Directory. By 1921, the dream was crushed by the Soviet army. Ukraine was folded into the USSR, its flag hidden, its leaders exiled or executed. But like all the ghost republics before it, Ukraine's idea never died. It slept, waiting for another century to wake again. The world was supposed to find peace after 1918, but peace was only an illusion. The treaties that promised order instead sowed resentment. Every border drawn in Paris was a future war waiting to happen. And when the next storm came, in 1939, those fragile republics were the first to disappear. Imagine them now, their flags fluttering for the last time in the cold wind. Tiny governments burning their papers, citizens fleeing as tanks approach, songs fading into gunfire. The ghosts of Europe's republics began to multiply faster than ever. The war that came next would erase entire nations, not just cities. Republics would vanish overnight, and new ones, some brave, some cruel, would rise in their ashes. We are walking now toward the edge of that storm, toward the 1940s, where the ghosts are louder, and the night never truly ends. The world falls into darkness again. It is 1939, the year when Europe's ghosts returned. The armies marched once more. The old treaties burned, the flags changed overnight, and the fragile republics of the interwar years vanished beneath the thunder of war. What had been freedom for some became occupation for all. The first to vanish was the Second Polish Republic. Reborn in 1918 after more than a century of absence, Poland had lived just 21 years of independence. In September 1939, it was torn apart again, divided by Nazi Germany from the west and the Soviet Union from the east. Warsaw burned. The government fled to exile. And once again, Poland ceased to exist on maps. But the people, they did not yield. The Polish government in exile continued its work from London. Underground resistance grew in the shadows. The spirit of the Republic lived on in whispers and coded messages, even as its land lay in ruins. Further north, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, shared a similar fate. Each had gained independence after World War I. Small and proud republics built on hope and education. They had parliaments, flags, and an identity hard-won from empire. But in 1940, the Soviet Union occupied them, turning each into a Soviet republic. Their leaders were deported. Their governments dissolved. The tricolor flags were banned, and yet people hid them, folded carefully, buried in walls, passed from hand to hand through the years of silence. When freedom returned half a century later, those same flags would rise again. Across the continent, old names disappeared. Austria was annexed into Germany. Czechoslovakia was carved apart. France fell, split into occupation and the puppet state of Vichy. Each of these, once republics, now became shadows of themselves. The Czechoslovak First Republic, founded with such optimism in 1918, had been a model of democracy in Central Europe. But Munich changed everything. In 1938, foreign powers allowed Nazi Germany to take the Sudetenland. Months later, the rest was occupied. President Beneš fled to London. leading a government in exile. At home, a puppet protectorate ruled by fear replaced a republic once proud of tolerance and freedom. That first Czechoslovakia was gone, its ideals smothered beneath occupation and betrayal. Then came France. When the Nazis entered Paris in 1940, the proud Third Republic collapsed. In the quiet spa town of Vichy, Marshal Philippe Pétain formed his collaborationist regime, and the tricolor flag was twisted into a symbol of obedience. For 4 years, the name of France itself was divided, half in resistance, half in submission. The ghost of the Third Republic wandered through the occupied streets, hiding in cellars and underground presses. But even ghosts can fight. In London, Charles de Gaulle proclaimed that France had not fallen, that its soul was alive. And when the war ended in 1944, that soul returned, reborn as the Fourth Republic. Not all ghost republics were victims. Some were born in the chaos, fleeting, passionate, desperate. In the dying days of Nazi power, new republics flickered like sparks in the ruins. The Republic of Uzis in Serbia was one such spark. In 1941, Yugoslav partisans led by Josip Broz Tito liberated a region from German control and declared a socialist republic. For 2 months it lived, printing newspapers, running schools, even minting its own currency, until the Germans returned. It was destroyed, but the idea it embodied would rise again after the war, as the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. A similar brief light shone in the Netherlands. The Dutch resistance created small liberated zones near the war's end, calling them free republics, places where the flag could fly again. In France, too, before liberation, the Free Republic of Workers was declared in the mountains, a defiant act knowing it would not last. The Germans crushed it brutally, yet the memory became legend. Even a republic that lasts a single day leaves a mark that cannot be erased. And then, as the war ended, Europe's borders shifted once more. Millions were displaced. Old monarchies were gone for good. But what replaced them were not the old republics, reborn. They were new, harder, colder states, shaped by ideology. The people's republics began to appear. In Poland, in Hungary, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Czechoslovakia once more. They bore the word republic. But the spirit was gone. They were ruled not by the people, but by the party. Behind every flag fluttered the same shadow, the Soviet Union, now the master of the East. And in the West, a different kind of republic emerged. Democratic, capitalist, wary. The continent was divided, and the ghost republics of the past now found themselves trapped behind an iron curtain. But there was one far to the north, that survived through all the ages. Tiny ancient San Marino. Founded long before the others, nestled in the Apennine Hills, it remained untouched by empire. Through war and peace, occupation and alliance, San Marino kept its independence, a miracle of endurance. It is said that when Napoleon's army approached, San Marino simply offered him friendship, and he spared it. When World War II raged around it, the Republic stayed neutral. A ghost among ghosts, it lived on quietly as others fell. The 1940s ended with rubble, smoke, and divided hearts. Half of Europe called itself free. The other half said it was too. Both had republics, but only one side remembered what the word truly meant. Europe's ghosts did not rest after the war. They shifted again, not under kings or invaders, but under politics, revolutions, and cold alliances. In the years ahead, the Cold War, whole republics would appear, disappear, and reappear again, some born from independence movements, others from illusion. We are now walking into that world. The age of divided Germany, of short-lived revolts in the East, of new flags rising where old ones had fallen. The age of whispers, walls, and waiting. The war had ended, but Europe did not wake up. It simply opened its eyes to a new kind of sleep. There were no kings now. No emperors. Only borders, sharp, hard, and silent. The old republics that had died in war were resurrected, but in different bodies. They wore new names. People's republics, democratic republics, socialist republics. But their souls were not the same. the world was divided in two. On one side, the American-led West. On the other, the Soviet-led East. And between them lay a new kind of ghost. Nations that existed, yet did not belong anywhere. In Germany, there were two ghosts in one body. The land that once called itself the German Reich was now split by ideology. To the west, the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany. To the east, the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. Both claimed to be the real Germany. Both carried the same scars from the war. But one wore a different mask. In the west, Bonn became the quiet new capital, a humble, cautious republic built on democracy and economic revival. In the east, Berlin was a mirror of control, a socialist republic under the watch of Moscow. Families were divided. Friends vanished overnight. A wall would rise between them, not just of concrete, but of silence. Two republics, born from the ashes of one. Two ghosts walking in opposite directions. Further east, in Hungary, another ghost stirred. In 1956, the people rose against Soviet rule, demanding freedom. For a brief few days, a new republic appeared, the Hungarian Revolutionary Republic. Students led the charge, waving flags with a communist emblem cut out. Holes of defiance fluttering in the cold wind. They shouted for independence, democracy, truth. And for 12 short days Budapest was free. But the tanks came. Soviet armor rolled down the Danube streets. The revolution was crushed, and the Ghost Republic vanished overnight. Its leaders were executed or exiled. The world watched and turned away. Hungary's dream became Europe's quiet shame. A ghost that would haunt the continent for decades. And then, Czechoslovakia again. The land of hope, crushed once before, tried once more to breathe. In 1968, a movement called the Prague Spring began. Led by Alexander Dubček, the people called for socialism with a human face. For a moment, freedom returned. Censorship eased, borders softened, music filled the streets, and people spoke without fear. But ghosts do not like the light. One night in August, tanks from 5 Warsaw-pact countries entered Czechoslovakia. The dream was over before it began. Dubček was arrested. The brief Czechoslovak Socialist Republic with freedom disappeared, replaced by silence and conformity. Another ghost republic added to the list. Alive for months, dead for years. The Cold War created many such phantoms. Tiny, short-lived states that appeared like flickers between superpowers. In the Balkans, whispers of autonomy spread. In Croatia, in Slovenia, in Bosnia. But Yugoslavia under Tito held them together with iron will. His Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was itself a strange kind of ghost. A country that stood between East and West, claiming both friendship and independence. Tito refused to bow to Moscow. His republic was socialist, yes, but free of the Soviet leash. For decades, it worked. 6 republics under one federation, speaking different languages but sharing a single idea. Brotherhood and unity. But unity is fragile when built on fear. After Tito's death, the seams would begin to tear, and new ghosts would be born in blood. But that belongs to another batch, another century. Meanwhile, on Europe's southern edge, Greece, a republic flickered and vanished in confusion. In 1967, a military junta seized power. The democratic institutions collapsed, and for 7 years the country was ruled by generals. They called themselves saviors, guardians of order. But their rule strangled the soul of Greece. In 1973, the dictatorship declared a Hellenic republic, abolishing the monarchy. But it was an illusion, a republic without freedom. Only after the junta's fall in 1974 did democracy truly return. And the Third Hellenic Republic emerged. A real one this time, born not from propaganda but from people's pain. The Greeks, like their ancestors, had fought tyranny with words, ideas, and endurance. They too had known what it was to vanish, and to return. Even the smallest places felt the Cold War's shadow. Finland, neutral yet haunted, walked a tightrope between two worlds. never occupied, never divided, but never free to speak without caution. Some called it Finlandization, a republic that survived by pretending not to notice the empire next door. East Germany, though rich in propaganda, was hollow in spirit. Its people fled whenever they could, until the wall was built to keep them in. They left letters, empty houses, shoes in the mud. Each escape was an act of quiet defiance, each exile another nail in the coffin of the so-called People's Republic. And West Berlin, surrounded, isolated, glittering like a tiny island of freedom, became the symbol of the divided world. A city that existed between two ghosts. By the 1970s, Europe was full of republics, but empty of republicans. Governments ruled, but few truly represented. People had stopped believing in the idea that had once changed the continent, that power could belong to them. The ghosts of the first republics, Venice, Genoa, the Dutch, the Czechs, lingered only in books, monuments, and old coins. Their spirit, liberty, participation, equality, was buried beneath layers of ideology and fear. And yet, in the East, something was stirring again. A whisper began in shipyards, in churches, in underground movements. People started writing, meeting, singing again. Quietly, dangerously. They spoke of freedom not as a dream, but as a memory. A movement was rising, one that no tank could crush this time. Its name would be Solidarity. And it would start in Poland, the same place where Europe's republics had first died in 1939. History, it seemed, was ready to circle back. Began with a strike. Not a war, not a riot, just a strike. In Poland, 1980. The air smelled of metal and sea salt from the shipyards of Gdansk. Workers walked out of their factories, tired of low wages, censorship, and fear. They stood together under a banner, red and white, painted by hand. Across it was written one word: Solidarność, solidarity. It was not just a union. It was a heartbeat, an idea that the working class could speak, even under dictatorship. Led by an electrician named Lech Walesa, they demanded more than food and pay. They demanded dignity, truth, and the right to choose their leaders. For the first time since the end of World War II, a Soviet satellite state had been shaken not by bombs, but by belief. The Polish government trembled. They declared martial law. Tanks rolled again through the streets of Warsaw. Phones stopped working. Newspapers vanished. Soldiers guarded factories. Walesa was arrested. And yet, the movement did not die. The underground press continued to print leaflets. Priests gave sermons that doubled as secret meetings. And people whispered the name Solidarity in markets, in schools, in homes. The republic that had been lost decades ago. The Second Polish Republic, destroyed in 1939, seemed to stir again faintly inside the hearts of its people. By 1989, the world had changed. The Soviet Union was weakening. Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost and perestroika, opened cracks in the Iron Curtain. And through those cracks, the ghosts began to return. It started with Poland's elections in 1989, the first semi-free vote in the Eastern Bloc. Solidarity candidates won nearly every seat they were allowed to contest. The old communist regime collapsed quietly, and the Third Polish Republic was born. The people wept, sang, prayed. They had buried their ghost, and in its place stood something living again. The idea spread like wildfire. In Hungary that same year, the government quietly opened its borders to Austria, and thousands of East Germans escaped to the West. It was the first real hole in the Iron Curtain. Television cameras caught the moment. Families climbing over barbed wire, running across the border. Children in their mothers' arms, crying with joy. Within months, the Hungarian People's Republic declared itself over. It became simply the Republic of Hungary, free and democratic once more. The revolution of 1956, crushed by tanks, had finally been completed without a shot fired. Then came Czechoslovakia again, but this time not with fire and blood. In November 1989, students filled the streets of Prague. They carried candles, sang songs, and jingled their keys. A soft sound like the unlocking of chains. The police attacked, but the people did not run. They stood arm in arm. And the world watched as an empire dissolved. The movement became known as the Velvet Revolution. Peaceful, beautiful, unbreakable. By the end of the year, the communist government had resigned, and a playwright, Václav Havel, who once wrote forbidden plays, became president. The Czechoslovak Federal Republic was reborn, a republic of poets and dreamers, alive again after 40 years of silence. But not every ghost was meant to live together. 3 years later, in 1993, Czechoslovakia quietly split in two, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. There were no wars, no tears, only understanding. Two nations that had shared one body for 75 years decided to walk their own paths. It was called the Velvet Divorce, a separation so gentle it seemed unreal in a century of violence. Both countries thrived, and the spirit of the old republic, fair, rational, human, lived on in each. Farther south, however, in the lands once held by Tito's Yugoslavia, the rebirth of republics came with fire. When Yugoslavia began to break apart in the early 1990s, the world watched in horror. Slovenia declared independence. Quickly, peacefully. Croatia followed, but it was not so lucky. War erupted. Cities burned. Old neighbors turned into enemies overnight. Then Bosnia, the most diverse of all, declared its own republic. And the darkness deepened. Between 1992 and 1995, Bosnia became a battlefield of identities. Ethnic cleansing, sieges, massacres. The ghost of nationalism returned with a vengeance. When it ended, Europe wept for its broken heart. From the ashes rose small, fragile republics. Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia, Serbia, Montenegro, North Macedonia. Each claimed independence. Each carried a piece of the old Yugoslav dream, and a scar of its fall. The Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia had disappeared, not into legend but into tragedy. In Germany, meanwhile, another ghost story reached its ending. The Berlin Wall, that concrete scar across Europe, fell on the night of November 9, 1989. No army commanded it. No treaty ordered it. It was people, ordinary, confused, hopeful people, who began to cross freely when the guards stepped aside. East met West on the broken wall, crying, laughing, singing. It was as if two halves of one soul had found each other after 40 years of separation. The German Democratic Republic, the East German state, ceased to exist within a year. The republic dissolved into the larger one, and a single nation was reborn, the Federal Republic of Germany. For the first time since 1945, Germany was whole, its ghosts laid to rest beneath the rubble of its wall. By the early 1990s, the map of Europe had transformed again. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, had reclaimed their independence from the collapsing Soviet Union. Their republics, long erased from maps since 1940, were alive again, their flags flying once more in the wind. In each capital, Tallinn, Riga, Vilnius, old songs were sung again. People gathered in candlelight, their voices trembling, as they remembered the day their ancestors were taken. Now they were free. They had waited half a century for it. All across the continent, old names returned. Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Armenia, Georgia, each declaring its sovereignty as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics fell apart, each rediscovering its own forgotten republic within the ruins. The USSR, the Empire of Republics, dissolved into 25 new nations, some free, some fragile, some uncertain. Europe's ghosts, once silent, were now awake and speaking. The continent was no longer divided between empire and vassal. It was a chorus, messy, chaotic, human, singing different songs but in the same key, freedom. But as the 1990s ended, New questions began to rise. What happens when ghosts come back to life? What happens when forgotten states try to remember who they are? In a world that has moved on without them. The next part of this story, the story of identity, belonging, and the fading memory of the idea of republic, was about to begin. When the dust of the 20th century settled, Europe looked in the mirror, and did not recognize itself. Borders had shifted again. Flags were new, yet strangely familiar. Old anthems were sung in new languages. It was as though the continent had returned from the dead, and was now trying to remember its own name. The ghosts of the past had been resurrected as nations. But nations are not built on flags alone. They must breathe and feed and believe. And that was the hardest part. In Eastern Europe, the newly reborn republics faced an invisible struggle. Not against foreign invaders this time, but against hunger, corruption, and the weight of memory. Poland, free again after 50 years of occupation and control, had to rebuild everything from the ground up. Factories once run by the state were silent. Shops were empty, streets cracked. People who had fought for freedom now stood in long lines for bread. Democracy had come, but it brought confusion too. The old ghosts of poverty, of power, of fear, lingered in corners of the new republic. It was a second kind of war. Not for territory but for trust. And yet they endured. Poland joined NATO in 1999, and later the European Union in 2004. From the ashes of ideology, found stability. The idea of the republic had finally become real again. Not imposed by outsiders, but chosen by its own people. To the north, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, moved faster, as if racing against time itself. They had been swallowed by the Soviet Union in 1940, their independence erased by ink on paper. For 50 years they were told they did not exist. But memory is a stubborn thing. In 1989, a human chain stretched from Tallinn to Riga to Vilnius. 2 million people holding hands across 600 kilometers. They called it the Baltic Way. A living line of resistance. A bridge of bodies demanding to be seen. Now free again, they rebuilt their institutions, their languages, their pride. Old stone streets in Tallinn echoed with laughter once more. Church bells in Riga rang for the first time without fear. And Vilnius, wrapped in fog, glowed with candles as its people prayed for peace. This time real peace. They joined the European Union too. And in the quiet confidence of the 21st century, they walked forward, not as ghosts, but as proof that nations can die, and still return. But not all who returned found comfort. In Ukraine, independence came suddenly, like a storm breaking the sky. On August 24, 1991, the Ukrainian parliament declared sovereignty from the Soviet Union. Crowds flooded Kiev's Independence Square, singing, crying, holding portraits of ancestors who had died in famine and war. For a moment the air smelled of hope. But independence was not the same as unity. The republic inherited corruption, divided loyalties, and a powerful neighbor who could not bear to let go. The Ukrainian Republic, like so many before it, would learn that freedom is fragile, a candle that must be guarded from the wind. Even as the years passed, and governments rose and fell, that candle still burned, sometimes faintly, sometimes bright. Farther south, the Balkans were still bleeding. The wars of Yugoslavia had ended. But peace was uneasy, like a truce between ghosts. Bosnia and Herzegovina was now a republic divided within itself. One half Bosnian Croat Federation, the other Serbian Republic. A country held together not by unity, but by paperwork and diplomacy. In Serbia, nationalism still lingered like smoke after a fire. The dream of Greater Serbia, once shouted by soldiers and politicians, had left only silence and grief. Kosovo, once part of Serbia, declared independence in 2008. But not everyone recognized it. To some, it was a new republic. To others, a ghost pretending to live. And in the small republic of Montenegro, waves rolled quietly against stone ports that had seen empires come and go. Venetians, Ottomans, Yugoslavs. Now they belonged to no one but themselves again. Each of these lands, small, proud, scarred, carried memories too heavy for their borders. The ghosts of the Balkans, it seemed, had not yet rested. To the west, Europe looked different now. Calmer, wealthier, confident. But even here, the idea of the republic was shifting. In Italy, a nation once united by kings and wars, corruption scandals and economic crises began to erode trust. The First Republic, born after World War II, collapsed under the weight of bribery and scandal in the early 1990s. A Second Republic replaced it, new in name, old in habit, and in France, the Fifth Republic, created in 1958 by Charles de Gaulle, too tall, but uneasy, its ideals of liberty and equality, strained beneath the realities of modern politics. Still, the French believed in the Republic, as they believed in breath, imperfect yet essential. Even Spain, long ruled by monarchy, watched its own republics flicker in memory. The first, in 1873, lasted barely a year. The second, born in 1931, was destroyed by civil war and dictatorship. Now, in the modern era, voices in Catalonia whispered of a third. For them, the idea of a republic was not just political. It was personal, cultural, a yearning for identity. And somewhere between these new and old republics, a quieter story unfolded. In the heart of Europe, where power was no longer measured by armies, but by alliances, the European Union had become a kind of republic itself, a community of nations, bound not by force, but by treaties and trust. It had no king, no single flag that replaced the others, but it carried within it the ancient dream that had once lived in Venice and Rome and Amsterdam, a belief in cooperation, in reason, in shared destiny. Some called it a bureaucracy, others called it hope, but perhaps it was both. The last echo of Europe's long struggle to be one, without losing itself. By the turn of the century, Europe was full of nations, old and new, proud and weary, each with a flag, a constitution, an anthem. And yet, in their museums and cathedrals, their dusty town squares and riverbanks, one could still feel the presence of those who had come before. The Republic of Venice, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the free cities of the Hanseatic League, their names carved in faded Latin, their ghosts watching quietly, as new flags waved in the same wind. History had not ended. It had simply changed its clothes. But not all ghosts stay in the past. Some still wander the edges of maps, unrecognized, forgotten, waiting. Places that once were republics, now invisible in the eyes of the world. They are the quiet republics, the ones you don't find in atlases. And in the next breath of this story, we will visit them. The nations that disappeared not centuries ago, but in our own time. In the quiet valleys of 19th century Switzerland, bells chimed softly through the mist, echoing off stone church towers and snow-dusted peaks. It was a time when Europe trembled under the weight of revolution, yet in this alpine heart, a different kind of conflict brewed. The Sonderbund, a league of 7 Catholic cantons, had formed in defiance of the growing liberal tide sweeping through the Swiss Confederation. Their fear was not conquest, but erasure of their faith, their autonomy, and their centuries-old traditions. The year was 1845. Europe was a patchwork of monarchies and restless republics. In France, the July monarchy staggered toward collapse. In Italy, whispers of unity stirred. In Germany, dreamers imagined a great federation. But in Switzerland, a small civil war would decide the fate of a republic's soul. The Sonderbund War was brief, lasting less than a month, yet it carried the deep gravity of ideological struggle. Catholic versus Protestant, cantonal sovereignty versus federal unity. As autumn clouds swirled above Lake Lucerne, smoke from musket fire drifted through the villages. Men from Fribourg, Uri, and Valais fought not for conquest but for the right to remain separate, to guard their way of life against what they saw as encroaching centralization. They called themselves defenders of liberty, even as their opponents in the Federal Army claimed the same. The clash culminated in November 1847. General Guillaume-Henri Dufour, a man of calm authority and quiet restraint, led the federal forces. He forbade cruelty, demanded mercy, and sought to preserve the Confederation without bloodshed. Under his leadership, the war ended swiftly. The Sonderbund was dissolved, the Catholic cantons rejoined the Confederation, and a new Swiss constitution emerged, one that would give birth to the modern federal state in 1848. And yet, something had vanished, not in law, but in spirit. The idea of the old confederacy, a loose association of self-governing states bound by fragile oaths, had disappeared forever. The Switzerland that rose afterward was stronger, more united, but also less ancient, its medieval ghost finally laid to rest beneath the mountains. Beyond the Alps, similar tales unfolded. In Germany, the German Confederation, that nebulous union of 39 states formed after the Congress of Vienna, found itself unraveling in the wake of liberal revolutions. The dream of unity both inspired and devoured it. For centuries, tiny duchies and principalities had ruled their small corners of Europe. Hesse-Kassel, Nassau, Brunswick, Mecklenburg, Oldenburg, each with its own coinage, flag and court. Yet after 1866, as Prussia and Austria clashed for dominance, many of these micro-realms were absorbed, annexed, or quietly forgotten. In their place rose the German Empire, a powerful and disciplined structure that would one day dominate Europe. But if one listens closely to the older chronicles, you can still hear the laments of vanished courts, the lords who lost their thrones, the local councils that vanished, and the faded seals of towns that once called themselves free and sovereign. Europe, it seemed, was shedding its skin, leaving behind its mosaic of republics, leagues, and enclaves to form new nations that demanded unity above all else. Meanwhile, across the North Sea, whispers of another lost republic drifted from the Scottish Highlands. The Republic of Eigg, a short-lived and scarcely remembered experiment, flickered briefly in 1848, when a small band of radical idealists declared independence from the British Crown on the remote Hebridean island. Their dream lasted mere weeks before being quietly suppressed, their proclamations washed away by the cold Atlantic wind. And yet, these brief sparks, from the Sonderbund to Eigg, carried the same yearning heartbeat, a desire for self-rule identity, and the freedom to vanish from empires that grew too vast to care. Imagine it now. The echo of marching boots fading through alpine passes, the smoke clearing from Lucerne's valleys, and in the still air that follows, only the toll of church bells, mourning a republic that had dissolved into memory. Listen closely now. Imagine the slow creak of a ship's mast in the cold morning mist. The gulls call faintly above the Baltic Sea, and the salt wind carries the scent of tar, fish, and centuries of trade. Here once ruled the Hanseatic League, a vast network of merchant republics that bound the northern world together like a living web. Lübeck, Hamburg, Bremen, Riga, Danzig, and Tallinn. Their harbors were filled with ships whose flags bore the seal of freedom and commerce, not kingship or conquest. It began in the 13th century, when trade was perilous, and power was measured not by armies but by influence over routes, ports, and markets. The League was not a country nor an empire. It was something rarer, a brotherhood of cities. Each swore to protect the others, to uphold fair trade, and to keep the northern seas safe from pirates and corrupt lords. In their guild halls, carved from oak and lit by flickering oil lamps, merchants debated treaties and tariffs. They spoke a dozen tongues, yet shared one law, the law of the League. For nearly 300 years, this strange republic of merchants held sway. Its convoys reached from London to Novgorod, from Bruges to Bergen. Hanseatic ships carried salt from France, furs from Russia, timber from Scandinavia, and cloth from Flanders. In a world where feudal lords still ruled by sword and divine right, These merchants ruled by contract and coin. Lübeck, the queen of the Hansa, became the heart of it all, a city-state whose bell towers rang in the language of trade and liberty. But time as always moved against them. The great powers, Denmark, Sweden, and later Prussia, grew jealous and strong. New oceanic routes opened, carrying silver and spices from the Americas and the East Indies. The old Baltic trade dwindled. The League's influence waned, its cities divided, its treaties ignored. By the 17th century, the Hanseatic League had withered into a ghost, its once proud flags gathering dust in council chambers, its guild halls turned into relics of a vanished world. And yet, the spirit of those cities lingered. When the Napoleonic Wars came, the three Hanseatic republics, Hamburg, Bremen, and Lübeck, clung fiercely to their independence. For centuries they had remained free cities, small islands of autonomy amid the rising tide of monarchies. Napoleon admired them, then crushed them. In 1810, he annexed them into his empire, calling them departments of the Bouches de l'Elbe and Bouches du Weser. Their republican councils were dissolved, their flags burned. When the French fell, these cities rose again briefly, breathing life once more into their old charters. But the 19th century was unkind to little republics. By 1871, the German Empire absorbed them all, leaving only ceremonial freedoms. Lübeck's seal still bore the proud words Imperial Free City, but the empire had no patience for ghosts. In 1937, under Hitler's decree, Lübeck's autonomy was erased completely, the last surviving remnant of the Hanseatic spirit finally extinguished. Farther east, across the grey waters of the Baltic, other republics flickered briefly. The Republic of Uzupis, now an artist's district in Vilnius, remembers itself as a kind of parody of those old ideals. But centuries before, in the 15th and 16th centuries, the city of Riga had been its own republic, trading, minting coins, signing treaties. When Sweden conquered it in 1621, the merchants wept, not for the loss of land, but for the loss of freedom. In the centuries that followed, new republics appeared like morning fog. The Courland Republic, the Duchy of Livonia, and short-lived autonomous ports along the Estonian coast. Each rose out of rebellion or war. Each vanished again into empire. Now, picture the silent harbors of these northern cities. The old wooden warehouses lean toward the water. The cobblestones glisten with rain. Somewhere, a bell tolls from a red brick tower, the same bell that once rang to signal the start of a council meeting in 1350. The echoes of those vanished republics drift still over the Baltic, mingling with the wind. Their ships are gone, their flags forgotten. Yet their spirit, the belief that trade and cooperation could build a free world, lingers in the very bones of Europe. The century turned restless. The air of Europe was thick with the sound of marching boots, ringing church bells, and the whisper of manifestos read by candlelight. The age of revolutions, late 18th to mid-19th century, was an age of dreams, rebellion, and brief republics that flared like sparks in the dark before being crushed by the heel of power. Imagine the streets of Lyon, France, in 1793. The echo of gunfire, the air heavy with smoke. The Lyonnaise Republic rose for a few short months, born from defiance against the Jacobin terror of the French Revolution itself. Once a proud royal city, Lyon tried to stand apart, to create a moderate, self-governing state amid chaos. But the revolution devoured its children. The French army besieged it, starved it, and bombarded it into submission. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained of that tiny dream, only the memory of independence, buried beneath the rubble of its own ambition. Farther north, in the Low Countries, the Batavian Republic was born, a product of both revolution and occupation. In 1795, French troops marched into the Netherlands, and the old Dutch Republic, once Europe's most powerful maritime republic, dissolved quietly. The Batavian Republic promised freedom, equality, and fraternity, but behind its constitution stood French bayonets. Its citizens voted, but their choices were framed by the conqueror. Within a decade, it too transformed, first into the Kingdom of Holland under Napoleon's brother Louis, and then into another province of the French Empire. The once proud Dutch Republic, that bastion of tolerance, science, and commerce, became a ghost in its own canals. The echoes spread eastward. In Italy, the revolutionary wave created fleeting republics that came and went like storms over the Apennines. In 1796, Napoleon's armies swept through the Italian states, and suddenly maps changed overnight. The Cisalpine Republic, the Ligurian Republic, the Roman Republic, and the Parthenopean Republic, all formed between 1796 and 1799, all declared their liberty beneath French banners. Their streets filled with tricolor flags, their squares with citizens chanting the rights of man. But the ideals were thinly held. These republics were not born of their own people's power. They were planted by foreign hands. When the French armies withdrew, the old monarchs returned. In Naples, in Rome, in Genoa, the republics fell like autumn leaves. Their leaders were imprisoned or exiled, their constitutions burned, their memory forbidden. For those who lived through those days, the loss was more than political, it was spiritual. Imagine an old merchant in Genoa, standing at the harbor where his ancestors once ruled a maritime empire, watching French troops march away and royal banners rise again. He sighs, not in anger but in resignation, whispering words his father once told him. Freedom never lasts without faith. Across the sea in the Ionian Islands, the pattern repeated. The Septinsular Republic, created in 1800 under the joint protection of Russia and the Ottoman Empire, was the first modern Greek state, centuries before Greece itself was reborn. It had its own flag, its own constitution, and its own fragile identity. Yet like all small republics surrounded by empires, it lived only by the will of others. When Britain took control in 1815, the republic was dissolved quietly. Its flag lowered, its people promised protection instead of freedom. The wind carried these stories across Europe, whispers of places that tried to live by reason and hope, only to vanish when kings and emperors returned. But in every village where a citizen once read aloud the declaration of a short-lived republic, something invisible remained. A seed. These seeds lay dormant for decades, waiting for another age to rise. The revolutions of 1848 would water them again. And if you listen in the quiet hours of the night, perhaps you can hear it. The gentle crackle of paper being unrolled, the tremor in a young man's voice as he reads from a proclamation of liberty that has since turned to dust. Let your mind drift now to the lapping of soft waves against marble steps, the shimmer of torchlight reflected on water, the whisper of oars moving through a silent lagoon. This was once La Serenissima, the most serene republic of Venice. For 1,000 years, it stood like a jewel upon the sea, its heart beating with commerce, diplomacy, and quiet arrogance. It was not a kingdom, not an empire in the ordinary sense, but a republic of merchants and nobles who ruled themselves with a cold, deliberate order. Venice was born from exile. When barbarian invasions swept across the Italian mainland in the 6th century, refugees fled into the marshes and small islands of the Adriatic. There, amid salt and mist, they built their city, slowly, stubbornly, rising from water like a mirage. By the Middle Ages, Venice had become the gatekeeper between East and West. Its fleets sailed to Constantinople, its merchants bartered with Cairo, its coins were accepted in Damascus and Delhi alike. For centuries, the Doges ruled beneath the golden lion of St. Mark. Venice was a republic of laws, committees, and ancient traditions. Its Senate chambers echoed not with shouting, but with soft deliberation. Behind masks and silk robes, deals were struck that could change the fate of continents. The city glowed with power, not loud imperial power, but the quiet dominance of wealth and diplomacy. But even the calmest waters can turn against the vessel that sails them. The world changed. New routes to India bypassed the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire pressed from the east. Spain and Portugal ruled the seas of the west. Venice's golden trade routes faded. Its colonies crumbled, and its power dimmed. By the 18th century, it had become a relic, beautiful, decaying, elegant in its decline. Then came 1797. Napoleon entered the lagoon. his troops marching beneath the same bridges where gondolas once carried diplomats and courtesans. The Venetian Senate met for the last time in the great chamber of the Doge's palace. They voted, not for resistance but for surrender. The Republic of Venice, after more than 1,000 years, ceased to exist. Its flag, the winged lion, was lowered. Its last Doge, Ludovico Manin, wept as he left the palace. The city was handed like a coin between conquerors, first to France, then to Austria. The Treaty of Campo Formio sealed its fate. Venice was no longer Serenissima, only a possession of empires. And yet, as night falls over the Grand Canal, one can still feel that ghostly independence in the air, the proud silence of a city that once ruled without a king. South along the Adriatic coast, another ghostly republic had already faded before Venice fell. Ragusa, now Dubrovnik. It was small but fiercely proud. A narrow strip of stone clinging to the Dalmatian cliffs, Ragusa was the mirror of Venice, its rival, its twin, and its secret admirer. For 500 years, it balanced between powers, paying tribute to the Ottomans while trading with the Christians, surviving through diplomacy when swords would have failed. Ragusa's motto was simple and defiant: Non bene pro toto libertas venditur oro. Liberty is not sold for all the gold in the world. That liberty ended in 1808, when Napoleon's troops arrived. The Republic of Ragusa surrendered its independence. Its Senate dissolved, its seal broken. For centuries it had lived by skill and neutrality. Now it vanished into history, its memory preserved only in the echo of its motto and the curve of its harbor. The Mediterranean was full of such ghosts. The Republic of Genoa, once a maritime empire like Venice, was consumed by France in the same era. Lucca, San Marino's tiny cousin in Tuscany, became a duchy. Malta, once ruled by the Knights of St. John, a strange hybrid of monastic order and maritime republic, fell to Napoleon and then to the British. And yet, listen. Even as they disappeared, the spirit of these places did not die. Their marble plazas and narrow alleys still whisper the same language. The will to govern oneself, the dignity of ancient order, the silent pride of freedom lost. Imagine it now, the sound of water against stone, the hum of forgotten bells, the faint rustle of parchment treaties long turned to dust. The republics of the sea have gone, but their reflections shimmer still beneath the waves, flickering like candlelight beneath the ripples of time. Let your breath slow, and picture the wide plains of Central Europe, where mists drift through forests and the air hums faintly with the sound of forgotten armies. Here, in the very heart of the continent, empires were born and died, and between them, small republics flickered briefly, like lights in a storm, each burning with its own fragile hope before being swept away by the winds of power. The Republic of Krakow, or the Free City of Krakow, was one such light. Established in 1815 after the defeat of Napoleon, it was a delicate creation of diplomacy, a neutral buffer between three empires, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. For a time, Krakow thrived. Its scholars wrote of freedom. Its merchants traded without fear of tariffs. Its citizens celebrated their city as the last independent piece of old Poland. The Polish crown was gone, the Commonwealth dismembered, yet Krakow stood, a single spark of liberty. But liberty frightened kings. The city became a haven for exiled Polish patriots, revolutionaries, and thinkers. The air grew thick with rebellion. In 1846, the people of Krakow rose against Austrian control, hoping to ignite a Polish uprising. But the empires moved quickly. Austrian troops stormed the city. The rebellion failed. The Free Republic was formally annexed into Austria. Its brief 3 decades of independence ended, and with them died one of Europe's last pocket republics. Not far away, another ghost had already faded. The Illyrian provinces, a creation of Napoleon's restless imagination. Between 1809 and 1813, along the Adriatic coast from Trieste to Dubrovnik, these lands formed a kind of proto-republic, French in law but Balkan in soul. Its citizens enjoyed new freedoms, modern schools, and secular governance. It was meant to be the future, a modern state between East and West. But the empire that birthed it died too soon. When Napoleon fell, Austria returned, wiping the map clean. The Illyrian dream dissolved like morning mist. Move eastward again, and the tale grows darker. The revolutions of 1848 swept across the continent, from Paris to Prague, from Vienna to Budapest, and in their wake rose dozens of short-lived republics. The Hungarian Republic was one of the most tragic. In 1849, under the leadership of Lajos Kossuth, Hungary declared itself free from Austrian rule. Its banners flew over Pest and Debrecen. Its soldiers sang of liberty and home. For one bright year, the dream of independence burned fiercely. But the Habsburgs called upon their old ally, the Russian Tsar. Hundreds of thousands of Russian troops marched into Hungary, crushing the revolution. Kossuth fled into exile. The republic was extinguished, and with it, a generation's hope. Elsewhere in the German lands, revolutions blossomed in every city. The Frankfurt Parliament dreamed of uniting the German states under a liberal constitution, a German republic of freedom and unity. But the kings, wary and patient, crushed it. When the smoke cleared, the dreamers had fled, the flags had fallen, and the old order returned. Even smaller republics flickered into being and vanished again in those restless years. The Roman Republic of 1849, reborn briefly under Mazzini's vision of Italian unity, held out for only a few months before French troops restored the Pope to power. The Venetian Republic tried to rise again the same year under Daniele Manin, declaring independence from Austria. Cannon fire answered them. All across Europe, these republics shared a single fate. They were born from ideas, not armies. They existed not because of conquest, but because of belief. And belief alone could not hold against the bayonets of empire. Picture, if you will, the map of Europe as it appeared in 1850. An intricate web of imperial colors. Austria stretches vast and pale. Prussia cold and rigid. Russia immense and merciless. Between them, the space for small republics is gone. The ghosts that once filled those gaps, Genoa, Ragusa, Krakow, Venice, the Hanseatic cities, have all faded, absorbed by monarchs and empires. And yet, in the hidden corners of cities and minds, the old republics lived on, not as governments but as memories. In taverns and secret societies, exiles whispered their names. In books and poems, writers mourned them. And in every heart that longed for liberty, those vanished republics became a legend, proof that even against the weight of kings people could, for a moment, stand as equals. Now, listen to the silence of the mid-century. The sound of the map settling into shape. The ghosts of republics lie beneath it, their outlines faint, their voices dim, but still there, murmuring beneath the iron surface of empire. The century turned once again, and the world became colder, more mechanical, more certain. Steamships crossed the oceans. Railways pierced the mountains. The hum of factories replaced the quiet tolling of church bells. Empires now measured their power in steel and colonies, not in liberty. Yet, amid this thundering modern world, a few fragile lights still flickered, the last remnants of Europe's ghost republics. Among them stood San Marino, small and stubborn, clinging to its rock like a memory-made stone. High upon Mount Titano, its towers watched centuries roll by. Empires rise and fall, yet San Marino endured. Napoleon spared it, out of respect or superstition, no one knows. The Congress of Vienna ignored it, as if it were too small to conquer. By sheer humility and patience, it remained the last true survivor of the old republican spirit. Its survival, though rare, only highlighted how many others had vanished. Across the Alps, however, the end was near for the others. In 1866, the free city of Frankfurt, that proud remnant of medieval autonomy, where emperors had once been crowned, found itself caught between two giants, Austria and Prussia. When war came between them, Frankfurt remained neutral, believing that its old rights would protect it. But Bismarck had no patience for ghosts. When Prussia won, its soldiers entered the city. The mayor, Daniel Deckert, pleaded for mercy. The citizens gathered in silence on the Romerplatz. But the decree was final. The free city of Frankfurt was annexed to Prussia. Its senate was dissolved, its ancient constitution burned, its coins melted down. For more than 600 years, Frankfurt had ruled itself. In one moment it was gone. Elsewhere the same fate unfolded. The free city of Lübeck, proud heir to the Hanseatic League, was slowly stripped of its independence. By the 1870s, it existed only as a formality, its autonomy eroded by the expanding German Empire. The words free and Hanseatic remained, printed on seals and coins, but they had become symbols without substance, like the face of a god whose temple has long since fallen. Bremen alone clung to its title, guarded fiercely by its citizens. Yet even there, the age of freedom was fading into bureaucracy. The once independent city republics were now mere municipalities within a nation. Far to the east, another story ended in silence. The free city of Danzig, born in the ashes of empires, reborn after World War I, and standing once again as a tiny republic between Poland and Germany, carried the same ghostly spirit. Its people spoke two tongues, traded with both sides, and called themselves neither one nor the other. But peace could not last. In 1939, when German forces invaded Poland, Danzig's brief autonomy was extinguished in fire. Its flags were torn down. Its government dissolved. The world that had once known free cities and independent republics vanished under the roar of warplanes. And as the war ended, the map of Europe was redrawn once again. Thick, modern, decisive. The space for independence, for smallness, for subtlety was gone. The old Europe of many colors, of dozens of little states, city republics, and leagues, was replaced by a continent of nations. The free territory of Trieste, created after the Second World War, seemed for a brief moment to bring the old world back. It had its own flag, its own postage stamps, its own fragile government. But by 1954, even it disappeared, divided between Italy and Yugoslavia. That was the last of them. After 2,000 years of shifting, breaking, and rebuilding, the age of the European republics ended. Not in battle, but in silence. And yet, as evening falls over the continent, traces remain. A coat of arms carved into an old city gate. A Latin motto over a council chamber door. A bell that rings at dusk in Bremen, in Riga, in Dubrovnik. Their sound drifts through the air like memory. Thin, persistent, unforgotten. Europe's ghost republics never died entirely. They live in the minds of historians, in the stones of old ports, in the quiet pride of small places that once called themselves free. And if you walk through those streets today, beneath the lanterns of Lübeck, the marble of Venice, or the rain-soaked cobbles of Krakow, you may feel it too. The faint hum of vanished sovereignty, the breath of old liberty, whispering just beneath the noise of the modern world. And so, we come to the closing whispers of Europe's ghost republics. The final sigh of those states that flickered, then vanished into the folds of memory. In the calm after the chaos of empire, after revolutions, after treaties signed and erased, Europe became a continent haunted by its own reflections. The names remain, faintly echoing through time. Ruthenia, Livonia, Carpatho-Ukraine, the free state of Fiume. Yet their voices are hushed now, replaced by modern boundaries, smoother lines on maps that hide the jagged edges of human longing. Imagine the mist over an early European morning, dew resting on stone walls that once guarded invisible borders. The ghost flags fluttered once more before silence settled. A postman in 1920s Transylvania delivering letters no longer recognized by his new masters. A farmer in the lost Republic of Carnero watching ships that no longer belonged to his dream. A teacher in East Prussia opening a geography book that no longer listed her homeland. And yet life went on, it always does. Europe rebuilt itself, forgetting the names of its brief republics but carrying their essence. Every small state, every vanished republic, left behind a lesson about human desire for belonging, for identity, for freedom. And though the borders are drawn anew, the soil beneath them remembers. It always remembers. Now, take a slow breath. Let your mind drift through those centuries. Picture the faded maps, the worn coins, the torn flags, resting in the quiet drawers of forgotten museums. Hear the hush of the wind across ruins once called a capital. These places are not gone. They are sleeping beneath history's blanket. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Inhale the faint scent of parchment, ink, and the earth after rain. Feel the centuries settle softly over your thoughts, like dust over old marble. Europe's ghost republics are whispering still. If only you listen. Let it fade now. Slow and calm. The stories, the names, the dreams that once rose and fell with each dawn. The past is not lost. Just resting.